Here we're looking at vehicles changing lane without looking properly. So different scenarios that arise where this is the case, that a driver would change lane but not give proper attention to what's happening around him, and so very often results in a collision. In this animation, we see the driver of the red vehicle in the middle lane realizing suddenly that he needs to actually get into this lane, and so without looking cuts across the path of the green vehicle. And so we want to be aware, both for ourselves before we change lanes, of what's happening around us. That means not just checking the rear view mirrors, but also looking to the left and right. If we're moving into the left lane, we want to especially make sure of what's happening just to the left side of us, and likewise on the right side if we're moving into the right lane. So always have that situational awareness, that bubble of safety around us, so that we know that we're free to carry out any maneuvers. In this real life clip, what's actually happening here is that on the other side of this truck is a vehicle traveling almost at the same speed as the truck, and so the driver of the truck actually gradually moves across into the right-hand lane. But because this vehicle is immediately alongside the truck, he's actually in the blind spot of the truck, and so the driver of the truck moves across thinking that it's clear, but actually makes a connection with that vehicle. So we'll progress the video and you can see what takes place here. So I'm just stopping at this point. You can see the wheels are slightly turned to the right side here. If I progress a bit further, you can see the truck's moving across to this lane and actually catches the vehicle on the other side and pushes it over into oncoming traffic. So especially when going past a truck where the cab is more elevated off the road, we want to make sure that we don't stick in that blind spot area of the truck. So when passing a truck, try and do so as fairly quickly as we can, not to travel alongside the truck and not to try and pass the truck slowly. So obviously prevailing traffic, if that allows it, we want to try and pass the truck quite quickly. So normally what I do, if the vehicles ahead of me are traveling a little bit slow, in order to pass the truck fairly quickly, I hang back just to give a bit of a buffer zone, let the vehicle ahead go past the truck, and then I can traverse or cross that buffer zone alongside the truck a lot quicker. So yeah, in this animation we have a vehicle traveling at speed, the Mini, and because of that, the driver of the red vehicle is not anticipating that another vehicle would be coming up alongside it on the right side, and so pulls across without looking properly, or perhaps had looked in the rear view mirror, had seen the Mini being at quite a distance behind him, and so thought there was enough of a gap in order to move into the right lane, but not checking his rear view mirror again just prior to changing lanes, because then he would have noted the speed at which the blue vehicle, the Mini, had actually closed the gap, and so makes connection. So in a similar situation, we have this vehicle traveling at speed, and so the vehicle in the middle lane, not anticipating that this vehicle would rapidly approach alongside his vehicle, now moves into the right lane and actually sideswipes that vehicle. So a similar situation where we've got the blue vehicle traveling at speed, the driver of the red vehicle not anticipating, note there are no other vehicles to obscure the view, just the driver of the red vehicle not having that situational awareness, decides to pull to the side of the road and doesn't look properly. So yeah, we've got an interesting clip once again with a vehicle traveling at speed on the right hand side, and the camera, finding that there's a slower vehicle ahead of him, now wants to pull across into the quicker lane, not anticipating there's going to be any traffic coming down that lane. and then cuts across the path of this speeding vehicle. Now, what's interesting about this clip is that we actually have video footage of the faster vehicle as well. So we had footage from the camera's vehicle, which was this vehicle. Now we've got footage from the vehicle that was actually speeding. And notice that the speeding vehicle's in the middle lane to start off with. So the vehicle ahead of what was previously the camera's vehicle may have checked his rear view mirror, seen that it's clear, and so thought then he's clear to go to move across into this lane, but hadn't failed to check his rear view mirror again before actually changing across into the lane. In this animation, we've got the driver of the rear vehicle. Now, also once again, no situational awareness, not checking to the left side of him. But what I've included this animation for, as I did in a previous video, is that we've always got to be careful when we see a vehicle changing lanes, not to assume that the vehicle will cross just one lane. As soon as we see a vehicle crossing a lane, be in expectation that that vehicle is going to cross multiple lanes. And so that's the purpose of this animation. And so we see that the rear vehicle crosses multiple lanes. And in the real life clip, we see this vehicle crossing 2 lanes into the path of the truck. Here we have the driver of this vehicle being oblivious to what's happening around him, maybe distracted because we see that he's drifting off into the left-hand lane, not actually intentionally wanting to go across to that lane. We don't see any indicator, we don't see a decisive moving to the lane, but rather simply just drifting across that lane, perhaps busy on the cell phone, changing a radio station, chatting to someone next to him. But as he does so, the faster moving vehicle down the left side here is forced to have to try and go around this vehicle encroaching into its lane, and then actually hits the curb. In this real life clip, we've got the driver of this white vehicle in the left lane and a slight bend in the road. And so where there's a slight bend in the road, always assume that the driver is not going to be cognizant of that bend or curve in the road and continue straight. And that's exactly what happens here. This driver also not paying attention again, thinking perhaps the road doesn't take as much of a curve as what it does, or perhaps assuming that the road will just continue straight, then doesn't follow the curve of the road and crosses into the path of this vehicle. Comes off second best there. So here we have a situation where there's a slower vehicle ahead, and so the driver of the red vehicle, not wanting to be held up by the slower vehicle, just moves across into the path of the green vehicle. Doesn't check properly. So this is a very common situation where we've got slower moving traffic. Always anticipate that any vehicles behind the slower moving traffic that is moving faster than the slower traffic is going to want to pull into a quicker lane. That's what happens here. The driver just pulls across, doesn't check his mirrors or to the side. So in this particular animation, what I'm trying to highlight here is that where there might be slower moving traffic, and so we've got the white vehicle now moving across to bypass the slower moving traffic, moves into the left lane and has enough space to do so, so no problem in this vehicle moving across into the lane. But where the danger is that a vehicle following that might just copycat the vehicle ahead of him and think that, well, because this vehicle has safely moved into the lane, that it's safe for this vehicle now to do the same, also move in the lane, and doesn't bother to check if there's any traffic alongside him, just simply assumes that it's safe to do so because the car ahead of him had done so. So here we've got this black vehicle that's doing a U-turn across the road, and the driver of the white vehicle, perhaps he's following his buddy over here, sees his buddy crossing the road, and just decides to do the likewise without checking properly, and so actually smashes into the vehicle alongside it, which, as you can see, has overturned that vehicle. Unfortunately, this driver is courteous enough to stop and go and check on the welfare of this driver and help the lady out of the vehicle. In this animation, what we're actually showing here, you can see that the green vehicle is towing a trailer. And so when we wanting to change lanes, maybe the driver of the red vehicle is aware of the green vehicle and tries to time his lane change exactly to be as soon as this vehicle has passed him. So he may have taken note of the vehicle, sees the speed that the green vehicle is traveling at, and tries to anticipate when he's going to reach the slower moving traffic ahead of him, and try and time his change to the left-hand lane as soon as the green vehicle has passed, not being aware of the fact that the green vehicle is actually towing a trailer, and so moves across and connects with the trailer. Same thing happening here. We can see a truck coming down the right-hand lane. The driver ahead of the camera is wanting to move into the quicker moving traffic, so anticipates that it will be fine to do so once the cab has passed in front of him, but fails to take note of the trailer, because notice it's a very low bed trailer, and so perhaps just at shoulder height doesn't see that there's anything behind the cab, thinks it's clear to go, but then actually connects with the trailer. In this real life clip, we have the camera's vehicle pulling alongside the pickup truck at the intersection, and now moving across the intersection. But because the camera had actually changed lanes just prior to the intersection, the driver of the pickup truck may have thought that this lane is actually clear. So in crossing over the intersection, didn't bother looking before encroaching into the right-hand lane, and so actually blocks the path of the camera's vehicle. And so just to highlight a point here again, always be cautious about changing lanes just prior to an intersection. So I've got other videos which highlight this point as well. So as you go through those videos, you'll see that very often when a vehicle changes lane just prior to an intersection, that it can have negative consequences as a result of that. So if I progress this video, you see that that's the case. The truck encroaches into the camera's lane. In this animation, we've got the driver of the red vehicle progressing down the left-hand lane, and perhaps not really taking note of what's happening ahead of him. There's a vehicle that's actually parked in the left-hand lane, and perhaps at the last moment now, noticing the parked vehicle, and tries to swerve out of the way into the path of the blue vehicle. So for the driver of the blue vehicle, if that was you, and you had that situational awareness, you would have noticed that there's a vehicle parked on the side of the road here, and known that it was in the way of the red vehicle traveling down that lane. So you could have anticipated that the driver, in all likelihood, would have wanted to actually move into your lane and perhaps hung back a bit or traveled a little bit faster so that you could get ahead of this particular situation where the red driver is forced to actually come across into your lane. So here we've got some occupants of this black vehicle, and it looks, if you study the video, like a group of youngsters, perhaps joking, playing around, and then at the last moment seeing that this vehicle is protruding into its lane and tries to swerve across into the path of the camera's vehicle. So for the camera, once again, having that situational awareness, would have noticed that the vehicles that are on the left-hand side, jutting out into the lane a little bit, and so would have perhaps anticipated that any vehicles traveling in that lane would have wanted to encroach into his or her path on this side of the road.
Please like, subscribe, and get notified.